Hello, everyone, and thank you all for taking the time to join Sonja's webinar today. It's really nice to see everyone out here, and as you can see, Sonja will be the one delivering the webinar today, so she's basically the star. Before I begin, though, I'd just like to introduce who I am. So my name is Bill Situ, and I'm one of the ELT specialists for TC Media ELT. I will go ahead and introduce Sonja in just a moment, but before I do, I'd just like to clarify exactly our branding. So as you can see in my screen, as well as the screens of a couple of my colleagues over here, you can see it says TC Media ELT in the background. So that is our current branding. Some of you might have known us under previous brand names such as Pearson AirP or AirP ELT, but as of right now, our branding is TC Media ELT. A lot of the resources and products that you probably are familiar with, such as Connections or LEAP or Advanced in Academic Writing, those products have remained the same, albeit we've changed different brand names. So that's really been the only change. So again, Sonja has kindly volunteered her time to deliver this webinar today. And you can probably tell just by coming into this meeting room that it's going to be on creative low prep strategies for English language teaching or for ELT. So a little bit about Sonja herself. Sonja is one of the authors of our Connections textbook series. So that's a general English series. If any of you are interested in that textbook series, you can reach out to me or to my two other colleagues, Chantal Legault and Deborah Kashak. So if you are in the province of Quebec, then you would reach out to them. And if you are anywhere outside of that, then I would be your contact person. Anyways, back to our guest of honor, Sonja. Sonja began teaching English back in the 1990s, beginning in Japan. Interestingly, that also was where I taught English at one point in time too. So I guess we have something in common there. And she's been, like I said, she's been in this field for now over 30 years. Currently, she's based in Vancouver, and she is a TESOL Canada certified teacher trainer, curriculum developer, as well as a speaking examiner. So she has a wealth of knowledge and expertise in the field of second language teaching. And having been in this industry for such a long time, she has seen the change and evolution of this industry. And really, this is her motivation for her to keep growing with her students. And then the Connection 6, which she is one of the authors of, very clearly reflects a lot of lessons that she learned all throughout her career. There will be a Q&A or question and answer session at the end of this session. So if you have any questions of any kind, Sonja will be more than happy to answer them for you. But it'd be great if you could just send them to me via private messaging. So then that way she does not have to do too much multitasking because she will be busy presenting. So again, any questions that you have, you can just privately message them to me. And without saying too much more, I'm now going to hand over the floor to our guest of honor tonight, Sonja, and she is now going to begin presenting. Stage is yours, Sonja.
Thank you very much, Bill. Yeah, I've chosen this topic because I have many years of experience in the classroom, and the TC Media company has my textbook, has published the textbook, and just to connect to that, having published the textbook, I will use that series as the basis of my examples for what I want to talk about today. That being said, the tips, the activities that we will talk about in this presentation really can be used in any textbook. And the fact that I'm using the Connection series, of course, is because I know it so well, but I repeat myself, it's adaptable to any textbook. So I don't know who has joined, how much experience you have. I'm sure many of you have a lot of experience, and I'm sure some of the things that I will say you might be already doing, or perhaps you have a different angle that I haven't thought about. I welcome questions and comments and ideas in the question period afterwards. So I'm going to aim for about 45 minutes and then finish off with about 15 minutes of question Q&A period. So I've titled this Going Beyond the Textbook with the Textbook. Practical no prep activities. No prep because as teachers we are always busy and prep takes a lot of our time. So how to encourage that student engagement, how to boost language learning without the preparation. This is what I'm looking for and to give you in this presentation today. So the introduction. I'm going to read out my first sentence. This is the official introduction. The aim of this presentation is to help you see implicit learning opportunities within textbooks and to give you examples of how to utilize them successfully. And that's great, but it doesn't talk about the why. Why would you need to identify those learning opportunities, especially without the prep? And in a practical world, perhaps your class needs a morale boost. You know, it's the students are not really engaged. They're not really interested. You're not interested. Perhaps you've taught the textbook long enough that you're kind of bored too. And seeing things in a fresh way might help your class be more successful. Maybe you're a sub and you've burned through a lot of the material that you've been given, and there's still quite a lot of class time left. These activities, these tips that I'm going to give you are for those times. It'll give you pedagogically sound material or ways of looking at the textbook that will keep your students interested. Maybe you want to shake things up. You know, it's the textbook is formulaic. It is a one size fits all kind of teaching material, teaching resource. So shaking it up, making it more your style or connecting more to your class, again, is motivating for your students. So that's the goal of this webinar, is to give you these tips and tricks and ways of looking at the textbook for those kinds of situations. Now, a lot of the activities that I will present require creative thinking, and that's what I'm talking about in the second point here. And creative thinking, I know I've often done this in class where I say, you know, do something, be creative, and students will say, oh, I can't, I'm not creative. And it is really paralyzing, intimidating when somebody expects you to be creative right off the bat. So this presentation is not that kind of creativity. It's about using, enabling, encouraging students to be creative in a successful way. And it's about showing you how limitations, how restrictions will help students really enjoy themselves and come up with very creative ways of answering or fulfilling requirements. So that's a big part of this webinar, using creativity, but it's not the whole part. There's also repetition, because learners, and we're all learners, we learn through repetition. So how to repeat, how to go over the material again and again in different ways at different times during the class or the course, and still keep it fresh. So using restrictions to encourage creativity, using the textbook to repeat grammar points, vocabulary points, and help your students learn better. These are the two main themes of this webinar. But also other activities involve guessing, they involve prediction, they involve general knowledge. So it's not only creativity and repetition. I do want to give a shout out to Jill Hadfield and Penny in my long career, I was lucky enough to see both of them present, and they have amazing ideas. So if you want to do a follow-up on your own, Jill Hadfield, she's the queen of creativity in the classroom. Penny has so many pedagogically sound activities that require just a little prep. So those are two names that have inspired me, and I acknowledge them in helping give me ideas for this webinar, as well as my own classroom work. So I said a big part of these activities are connected to creativity, and there is a lot of benefits to creativity. So higher level thinking is something that many textbooks are not good at. Encouraging students to think beyond the exercise. Now, the Connection series it tries to encourage this higher level thinking. But as I've said, not all textbooks do. So creativity does push students to move beyond the what's the answer, fill in the blank kind of thought, to see language as a way of communicating and expressing more complex ideas. Many students are very good at the formula. If you have students who have a lot of test taking experience, they're very good at the formula, but they can't actually use the structures without the support of the textbook or a test. And creativity does push them to move beyond that. Critical thinking skills. Again, it's that higher order thinking where the answer is not in the textbook. They have to bring their life experience, they have to bring their logic and think through it in English. So again, it pushes students to more of their limits. Creativity is always level appropriate, and you might be teaching a single level class, but it's never a single level class. There's always students who are better at one skill, weaker at a different skill, students who have learning abilities or disabilities or challenges. So all classes are mixed level in some way.
Everything.
So I hear somebody's microphone there. So being a level appropriate, creativity allows students to work at their own ability, at their own speed. So this takes a lot of pressure off you. Creativity is also student-centered. The students really get to create, to make what they're interested in and to go in directions that they are interested in. And this can build confidence, because they come up with a sense of accomplishment. I just did a poetry workshop this morning, and the students were very proud of what they had created. And the confidence that came through that was really visible. When you're using creative activities, there's a sense of play. It engages students that may not be very motivated by textbooks. It feels a little less serious, but it's still very pedagogically sound. They are learning. When students are creative, there's a lot of ownership with that work. With the textbook, it's following what the teacher says or what the textbook author wants you to do. But when you are using your own creativity, it's you. So you have that ownership. And it also, when you're bringing creativity in the classroom, it can make class less predictable. And when the class is less predictable, students are happier going, and happier students, we all know, is a much easier job to teach and makes teachers happier too. Lastly, I bring up repetition again, repetition during the unit, after the unit, much later in the course, where learning is 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, repeat, review, and that solidifies language acquisition in a way that tests don't. So using creativity to bring in repetitive exercises can make it feel a lot fresher. All right. So I talked about the dangers of creativity, as in be creative, and that can be paralyzing. Um, I've I've put this in italics because this is the key point you need to think of when you're doing some kind of creative exercise. You need to give boundaries. So I'll give you an example. Here is a photograph out of the connection series. As I said, I'm using the connection series as my examples, but this applies to all textbooks. You might tell students, okay, write a story about this man. I mean, it's a photograph in the unit. You've pulled that photograph out and you say, write a story. And if I tell you that as the teacher, write a story, it's going to be really difficult. You don't know where to begin. You don't know where to end. But what if I add some restrictions? Write a funny story. Okay, funny, about how this man got the watch he is wearing. Okay, so now I think of an origin story. Who gave him the watch? Why was it given? Okay, and then I have to make it funny. Now the ideas start happening. Maybe I say, write a story about why the man loves reading so much. Now, so again, back to an origin story, but maybe a biographical story. Write an Instagram post. So now I've given a shorter, a clear limit, because Instagram posts aren't very long, about what will happen to the pile of books after the photo shoot is finished. So we're not even talking about the man, but we're stepping back and looking at the photo shoot. So the last three options are much more successful in the classroom than the first option. And I think you can see that with your own thoughts going through that. All right, so to start off with the textbook. And as I said, I'm using connections, and connections, like many textbooks, starts with a unit photograph, a large full-page unit photograph that brings the themes of the unit, the ideas of the unit. It kind of sums it up in one picture. There are so many ways to use these opening photographs. And I've listed a few for you here. So, for example, the first way, you might take a look at cash, credit, or other and ask students to brainstorm all the vocabulary they know about this topic. Cash, credit, it's going to be shopping, it's going to be buying, maybe it's banking, um, everything that they know, and give a time limit. Um, so that there's a bit of pressure, so that they are really focused on this task. After finishing the unit, ask students to repeat. So how many words can they think of connected to the unit picture? And then ask them to compare it with their first list, the list that they have at the end of the unit. Have the words grown? Students, all of us, do very well when we compete against ourselves. And I think about myself if I go to the gym, which I don't love going to the gym, but I always, for whatever reason, push myself on the treadmill. Okay, I did so long yesterday, I'm going to do 1 more minute today, or just a little faster today, because I like to compete against myself. And in the classroom, students like that as well. So when you're doing activities, use the picture open, and then at the end of the unit, close. Do the same activity, see how the lists have changed. Another thing you can use is prediction. So cash, credit, or other, what kinds of things are going to be covered in the unit? And get the students to list, brainstorm, and then have them flip through the unit, look at the titles, and see if they were correct. Before starting the unit, use a little bit of creativity. Maybe they write a dialogue, a story, a news article. What happened before this picture and what happened after it? And you might even divide the class into two and have the first part of the class, or half of the class, one half of the class, write or create some story article about what led up to this purchase, and then the other half at the same time, what happened after this purchase. And then you can match the students up from each side of the room and have them share that information. So communication is key to learning a language. And in this case, it's writing as well as speaking communication, sharing information. After finishing the unit, you could ask students to write a dialogue, story, news, incorporating some of the comprehension points or grammar points covered in the class. So there's a listening, there's a reading, there's a video in the connection series, but every textbook has a variety of tasks in the units. And you might get them to incorporate key points or points that came up during the covering the unit within their story or article based on the unit photograph. AI, when it comes to writing, AI is a big influence in the classroom, as you know. So you could offer it as homework, but make it an AI prompt. Maybe they don't actually have to write the story, but they have to create the AI prompt and hand that in to you. As you're going throughout the unit, not just starting the unit, maybe you're going to look at a reading and there's a bunch of vocabulary connected to the reading. Take a look at the unit photograph, brainstorm, and then see if any of those words are connected to the unit reading, because probably they are. So it's a nice bridge into different tasks within the unit. Moving into the unit, using the photographs inside the unit. So many different ways to use photographs. I've chosen 3 here out of a single connections unit, and using these pictures to foster creativity. So ask students to choose a picture, for example, and write a haiku. So haiku is 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. That's great for pronunciation review. It's really, again, creative. So it is student centered, and it really, it's great for mixed level classes. Students work at their own pace with this. And maybe you say, choose one of these 3 pictures. We've got the sleeping man, the awake man, and the man on the phone. Choose one of these 3 pictures and write a haiku about what the man is thinking. Choice does allow for more success because students can choose what resonates with them most, and the creativity grows that way. If we take a look at the second picture, the man who's awake, you might say, ask your students to write 5 sentences about how one of these 3 men got into this situation. Why can't he sleep? Why is he sleeping? And lastly, you can review any grammar point by asking students to maybe create a usually humorous, that people enjoy that, story or a dialogue about the picture. You might ask students to create a dialogue about what he's saying. There's a car accident in the background. What's he saying on the phone? And in this particular unit, it's the past perfect that is being covered. But maybe you're in a unit that is covering a completely different grammar point, but you talked about the past perfect weeks ago, and you want to bring that back in again. So using a picture and asking students to incorporate certain target language is great for review at any point during the class. So that's a lot about creativity. Now moving away into prediction. This is a unit photograph for opening the unit of a woman, and the unit title is How Can You Be an Everyday Leader? She's speaking into a microphone, so she's talking to a group of people. So you might want to warm students up by asking them to predict what she's saying. How can you be an everyday leader? What is she saying in that presentation? And if it's a lower level class, you might be very specific, write 4 do or don't do sentences. you could move into going to the second picture, reviewing. Now, this part of the unit was about a bad boss, and the listening was about a bad boss. And so they've heard what makes a bad boss, and you could ask them, based on this photograph, clearly it's work, list actions and maybe go beyond what they heard in their listening. They could write the list on the board and then as a whole class decide, or you could put that into teams, have them write it on the board and have the class decide who the worst person is. I've added bad friend because our students, your students, may not have work experience, so it's always good to be flexible. So using the pictures, there's so many different ways to use photographs. I'm going to continue with this, using the photographs as an introduction to the unit. So this is a unit on the environment, and the unit title was What Affects Your Environment? And one way, it's a lower level topic, so environment is maybe, or sorry, a lower level textbook. The environment is maybe an abstract concept for them to understand without direct translation. So you might ask them to go through the unit. In this particular unit in connections, there's a lot of animal photographs. So I've chosen 2 of the animal photographs within this unit, but there's many of them. There's a strong theme. So you could ask students before you get started to list all the animals they know, and then look in the unit and count how many are photographs of animals that are also on their list. So if they had parrot, they can find the photograph of the parrot. It's a good warmer, and it's a good way to get them looking through the unit and kind of seeing what's coming up next. You could also use these photographs, and again, the animal theme, as a way to personalize the unit. So you're about to start this unit. You might ask your students if they have a favorite animal amongst those pictured in the unit, and there's probably 12 pictured in the unit. Do they have a favorite animal? Why is it their favorite animal? What do they know about their favorite animal? And then when they actually get to the listening or the reading that involves that animal, they'll be a little bit more receptive because they have already thought about it. So it brings in a bit of repetition and life knowledge. Okay, so these are more photographs, and then we're moving into a task title. So taking a look at the dolphin, we're still in the unit about your environment. And that's the big unit photograph, a few different dolphins. And you might start off by asking students to list 5 things that can affect a dolphin's life. And that's a good way to talk about the environment, for example. At the end of the unit, you could ask students to go back and make that list again, as I've mentioned before, adding time limits, adding more ideas to that list. Then there's the middle picture, the lost child. We probably, many of us probably recognize it as Little Red Riding Hood, but some of our students might and some of our students might not. This is from a different unit in the same textbook. You might change the purpose. So maybe you've gone through question formation, and that actually can go up to quite high levels, depending on indirect questions, if you're reviewing questions, tenses in questions. So you could have students create 5 yes/no questions that police might ask about the situation in the photograph. And you might not tell them it's Little Red Riding Hood. They can interpret it as they see. So again, repetition, or maybe you want to see how well they do with question formation. So you do it, it's the test, teach, test method, where you would do it before you teach, and then you could ask them after you've taught the point to go back and make corrections with those questions that they originally created. The third picture is of a task title, a reading task title, 5 things people are doing to restore the planet. So you could take the task titles, moving beyond the pictures here in the unit, and work with those before actually going into the task. So you might ask students to predict 5 more things, because under the task title, it says they're using technology to fix damage. So maybe 5 more things. What do you think people are doing? And then they can do the reading and see if they were correct. After doing the textbook exercises, maybe students share their original lists and add, paraphrase what they missed. All right. So going more deeply into the task titles. This is from the higher level, actually the textbook that I worked on, Bitcoin. And this is a video, the watching. So students, it's quite challenging actually in this watching, because it's native speaker speed, and students might not have a lot of information about Bitcoin. I find a few are very passionate, and many of them really don't know much. So if you're teaching a mixed level class, and as I've said, all classes are mixed level in some way, this is a great homework opportunity. You could ask them to research, is Bitcoin a good investment? And then bring their answers to the class. Yes, no. And one of the best ways to share information that I find that changes up the energy in the class is to have students move around. So especially with yes, no answers. So you might designate the left side of the classroom to the no group and the right side of the classroom to the yes group. And maybe there are, I don't know, 10 people on the no side and 3 people on the yes side, and have them talk about why they have those opinions, why they share those opinions. It's a safe way of encouraging students to talk without putting a lot of pressure on them. And I find it's a very successful technique. So dividing the classroom and having students move to different sides depending on what their opinion is. Listening, again, with a reading, you can prep it in different ways, but watching and listening can put a lot of pressure on students. So it's nice to prepare a bit. What if there were no money? So instead of just jumping into the listening task, going through the vocabulary, going through the warm-up questions, and then doing the listening, you might run with it a little bit more. So you might ask students to describe going on a first date with no money. There's no money in the world. What would that look like? Or the 2 other options that I've just thrown out there for this presentation is Christmas Day because there's gift giving, or going to a wedding because there's gift giving. What would that look like in a world with no money? And generally changing up the energy where the reading is or the listening is quite serious, making it fun, doing something a little bit silly to warm students up and to become open to that idea can keep the energy going. So the task titles are a really good way. You just have to read the task title and think about ways to move beyond that. Extending the task. If you have a vocabulary exercise, so I've got a photograph here of an exercise and the instructions for this exercise. So you got student A, close your book, listen to student B's sentences. You've got student B, keep your book open, read the 2 sentences. So you might Yes, that's a vocabulary review exercise, but you could also switch it around to a grammar exercise. And maybe you say, look at these instructions. Let's do some instructions for an activity that is an everyday activity, but keep your activity secret. So, for example, shopping online or making instant noodles. So students have to write the instructions and then the class has to guess what are they for. So you've started with a vocabulary exercise, but you've been able to spin off into maybe a possible review or just helping the language grow. The next section is a writing activity. And writing is often difficult because some students are really fast, some students are really slow. There's always a mismatch between students' work and how fast they're working at. So for the students who write much faster, you could change the instructions. So the instructions here, write your cover letter, make sure you include addresses, the date, and there is a sample letter. So they've gone through, they've followed the formula, they're finished, and their classmates are still writing. So you could just do the opposite. Ask them to rewrite their cover letter so that they don't get the job. So when you're looking at instructions, it's always helpful to think about what would the opposite look like? What could you do to change up the instructions in a really simple way? And it can be a little fun. It doesn't have to be as serious as the initial task. All right. Using the unit summary. The unit summary, I think most textbooks have chapter summaries, unit summaries, where they go over the main points and themes that have been taught within that unit. Connections is one of those textbooks. And there's a couple ways to approach this. First of all, you could just have students do it. And that's fine. But as I've said, maybe you've got some extra time in the class. Maybe you want to assess their ability, but you don't want to give them a test. You want to make it a little bit lighter. Maybe you want to get students a little bit more engaged. So it's really fun, actually, for them to create their own unit review and use this textbook unit review as a template for their own. And you'll find that it's a very easy way to assess their understanding, their comprehension of the unit, target language when they create their own tests. Now, one caveat with this is that it takes a long time. So if you don't have a lot of free time in class, this is probably not an exercise that is so useful unless you say, okay, just do vocabulary or just do grammar. But if you do have more time and you ask them to create a unit summary by themselves using the textbook as a template, you can photocopy those, hand them out on the final day of class. It's a good way to celebrate, or the final day of the unit. It's a good way to celebrate the end of that. So using the unit summary for creativity, for repetition, for review is a really useful way to get students to use their language, not just fill in the blanks. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about changing instructions, and they can be really simple. So I've chosen just a grammar point out of the Connection series, one of the books. And it says underline the correct past tense to form, or the past tense form to complete these sentences. But maybe you say, well, okay, you've done the exercise. Now change the verbs. So you might say, by the time we left the venue, because found is the verb, so change it to left. They have to make that decision. The concert hadn't started. So it's the same formula, but they're working with language to change the meaning, but still working with the target structure that you want them to practice. So just randomly ask them, change the verbs, change the nouns, and they'll get a very different sense of um, of the structure and the sentence. It's not so much fill in the blank. You can also ask them to extend. You could say, what happened? So the concert had finished. What happened next? Okay, my dad, in part number 2, my dad hadn't arrived home yet. What happened next? So you can ask them to write a sentence after this sentence. And it really helps them understand that structure and the meaning of that structure, and gives you a little bit of time to work with students who need more time and more repetition. One way I like to do this is to ask students, to pair students up and ask them to bring each sentence they have adapted, modified to me, one at a time. And I'll start off by telling them they get 1 point for accuracy and 1 point for making me smile. Again, bringing in the creativity. So they're changing the nouns, they're changing the verbs, they're keeping the structure, and then they have to run up to me sentence by sentence, and I give them points. So it becomes a little bit of competition. They're in partners because it takes the pressure off individual students, and it supports communication, not only in writing, but also in speaking, especially in mixed level classes, which they're all mixed level. You could also ask them to write with themes, like a fun sentence, or dangerous, or angry. The one that works for me the best is ones that make me smile. So the key point out of this is change the instructions. Doesn't have to be exactly what is written in the textbook. Use of technology. So pros and cons. I've written the pros and cons pretty big because, as we know, you're teachers, I'm a teacher, there are definite pros to technology. It brings the classroom into the real world, because we're all using technology outside the classroom. So when you're in the class, you're working with a textbook, it's pen and paper, it doesn't really mirror the real world. And so there are sites like, I don't know if you know this particular site, classtools.net. They have an SMS generator. And it looks like texting. It has the sound effect of texting. Students are on their phone, but they don't exchange their own phone numbers. They're on a website and they're texting on the website, and then they can send it to you, and you can put their text messages on the screen to share with the class or print them out or whatever. So it's a different kind of writing, but it's really real world because they're all texting each other. Answer Garden, I'm sure many of you know Answer Garden. It is a website that students sign into, and then they can brainstorm all together. It comes up on your screen. You can share that information, and instead of having students run up to the whiteboard to write words on the board, you can have them text it, and it just changes the energy up a bit. So those are all good, but we all know the cons, and I just want to address that. With technology, you can only set up the activity as fast as your slowest student. So we all know that not everybody is equally tech savvy, and adding language challenges, it can be very slow to get everybody in the class on board. And if you have continuous intake which is what happens where I work. We can have new students joining every week. It means that we have to take that time to educate the new students every time somebody comes in. And that's not an effective use of class time. So using that technology judiciously, and sticking with the pen and paper for many different activities is probably the most effective way to use your time. I've added, not every student appreciates the use of technology, because maybe you've had this experience as well. I had a student last summer. He was I guess 19 years old, maybe, from Germany. And when I said, okay, get onto this website, he threw up his hands and he said, I'm an athlete. I'm not a techie. I don't want to be online. And it really resonated with me because, yeah, not everybody is happy being online. And lastly, there are always the technical challenges. The Wi-Fi might be slow, phone batteries might not be charged, and this can really slow the class down too. So I'm sure that you have experience with this. I've shared a lot of these tips and techniques that are technology free because of these cons that are connected to technology in the classroom. However, if you do have some websites or activities that you have online and it works for you, go for it, because they can really bring the classroom into the real world. So yeah, final tip, use technology judiciously. So in conclusion, move beyond simple question answer language learning. When you go through the textbook, it's really formulaic, it's very predictable, it's highly supported. It leads to some kind of memorization in a very controlled and restricted way. It's not effective for preparing students for the real world. Using the photographs of the textbook, using the task titles, using the exercises, changing instructions, really helps students access their critical thinking skills and develop critical thinking skills in another language. Super difficult. It expands their vocabulary. It motivates them. It fosters a sense of ownership over their own work. It personalizes or allows them to personalize parts of the textbook. It utilizes self-competition so that they're constantly moving a little bit forward against themselves, which is very confidence boosting. It allows for prediction, which helps with comprehension. As we know, when you can predict with reading, with listening, with watching, you're going to understand more and you'll remember more. And finding ways to help students predict is always useful. Review, repetition is super important in helping students be successful in learning. Keeping the class interesting, keeping the class engaged, and keeping it student-centered, self-paced. These activities are ways of doing that just following the textbook exercises and tasks don't allow you to do. So that brings me to the end of the discussion. I'm super curious to know if you have tried any of these activities before, what worked for you. Do you have any other ideas that I haven't mentioned? Can you see yourself applying this in your own classroom? Do you do this all the time, or is it kind of new for you? Any questions that you have? I would love to hear you.